Welcome to episode 20 of One Step Beyond, a show about positively engaging with the world outside our door. Alternate tagline: take a step outside your comfort zone and enrich your life. And this episode, I can assure you, fulfills both those criteria. I'm Tony Fletcher, a writer by trade, and I'm super excited about what you're about to hear. I'm titling this episode Black Travel Matters, which I hope is somewhat self-explanatory, and if it isn't, all will soon be revealed. I'm recording this episode and doing the final editing on January 20th, the day of the inauguration, and there is so much I could say about how this episode correlates to the momentous events of today. But to perhaps hone in on a specific reference or two that I don't think will date quickly. Then after an election in November and January that was largely decided by the people of Georgia, let me observe that my subjects today, note the plural, all live in and around Atlanta, the biggest city in the state by far and widely considered the black capital of the USA. To the fact that America now has its first female vice president, its first vice president of color, and one whose parents hailed from Jamaica and India respectively, let me note that we are discussing on this episode not only the travel experiences of my primary guest, Atlanta teacher Ashley Scott, but the educational travel he leads for his young black female school students who now have a role model in the White House, a woman who has broken the glass ceiling of the vice presidency and its color barrier with it. And this brings us to the fact that for me, the most profoundly potent and pertinent performance of the inauguration ceremony was delivered by the 22-year-old black female poet Amanda Gorman, with the magical words of "The Hill We Climb." If Amanda embodies the bright future of this potentially great but eternally troubled country, then the three young black women with which I also speak today, 24-year-old Nia, 23-year-old Deja, and 15-year-old Joy, also represent that bright future. I don't mind confessing that I've often had my doubts about humanity these last 4 years, and I'm perfectly sure such doubts will continue over the next 4 years as well. But as long as we can be producing well-travelled, well-rounded individuals like those you'll be hearing from about halfway through this episode, then the cup is way more than half full, my friends. So with all of that, I trust that you too will look on the bright side of life today and join me as we prepare to go one step beyond. I started off by asking Ashley to introduce himself and give us a little background about how he ended up doing what it is that he's doing.
So right now I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I was born in Georgia. I'm a teacher. I teach at Midtown International School. Travel for me didn't start until, mid 30s, maybe early 30s. I had never traveled out of the country before and decided to embark on an adventurous idea of taking kids out of the country. And so that idea sparked, 40 some odd countries later and taking 500, 600 kids later to different countries. So travel for me, it is that I do that for, part of my job at my school and in personal life as well.
So just the immediate thing, considering that you didn't start traveling till your 30s, so you didn't go out of the country basically till your 30s.
No, man, I had never gone anywhere. I didn't even think I could go anywhere. Like I grew up in South Georgia. To a single mom and I dreamed of traveling out of the country, but never really thought, if I can think back on it, never really thought that dream would ever manifest into something real.
So you mentioned part of it is through a school you work at, but another part of it you said is personal. So tell me about the personal side, about what you set up and what it represents.
I started 3 travel programs at 3 different schools. And I initially started, it's a long story, but I initially started because I knew that the students who I was teaching would possibly grow up like me and never had the opportunity to travel. So I started traveling with them. And then once I started traveling with them, I then realized that really the students who would be more impacted by my travel weren't getting the opportunity to travel because the travel was a little too expensive for them. So I started my own company called Abiri Tours. And Abiri does just that, create affordable international travel for Black and Brown kids and families. And so through creating Abiri, I've been able to take more students abroad and then more families, more Black and Brown families abroad.
The core concept there, and having read up on it somewhat, is that you realized when you were taking your school students that they were often the only people of color. Is that part of why you decided to set up your own group?
I have to give a little context. So I set up those travel programs with those individual schools. And then when I moved to a different school, the school I currently work at, um, I continued traveling on my own, doing other tours with families before I created Abiri Tours. And so when I would travel with those students who and families who were not part of the school, we were the only Black people we saw, the only people of color we saw when we landed, when we were walking through Italy or Beijing or Guatemala, wherever we were the only Black people that were there. And so yes, that lend itself, that sparked me to want to create something of my own. But more importantly, I think what happened was I realized that when I was traveling with those students, there were inevitably one or two students who could not go because the trip was a little more expensive. So 2,500, 3,000 to me and you for 2 weeks may seem like, okay, this is a steal, everything's included. I can get down with that. That's going to be a really good bargain. But for those families and those students, it still was a little more expensive than what they could afford. And so I was like, let's take out the middleman, let me create the trips. I can dictate how much they cost, what my profit margin is, thereby if someone needs to suffer, I can suffer and then I can give that savings on to the students.
During the lockdown, you started a podcast. I haven't seen an episode go up recently, but that you won't be the only person if that's the case who got one
Oh
going,
my God. Oh
and
my
then once
God,
you got back to work,
yes.
couldn't keep it going. But you gave it this title, Traveling Incognito,
Yes.
and I'd like you to define that because I found that really, really interesting.
Traveling incognito is this idea of living with this duality of being a Black American, but also having the privileges that are afforded to you with an American passport, right? So I get to see the world, and I think it's before COVID, it was like what the second, most powerful passport in the world, right? Um, I get to see the world, but I still, walk around with that Black skin. And so oftentimes I would see people of color, Black people in different countries I was traveling and seeing what they were dealing with and the injustice that they were suffering, knowing that had I not had this passport, that would, be me as well. And so traveling incognito is this idea that I am still a Black American, but with this passport, it kind of affords me this opportunity to kind of get a sneak peek into, the privileged world.
Right. Did you say that it's the second most valuable passport? Is that what I heard you say?
I think it is. Before COVID, I think it was Australia that was more, this was the strongest passport was Australia, which means um, the passport that allows you to travel to the most countries without a visa.
I didn't know until editing this show that passports were ranked by the number of visa-free countries they'll get you into, if that's the right expression. Turns out there's an index, the Henley Index of Passports, and according to the 2021 index, it's Japan that tops the list with 191 countries for which you won't need a visa. The two passports I hold, from the USA and UK, will both get me into 184. There's about another 20 passports or so that fall in between these two numbers. Perhaps a more important statistic is that only 42% of Americans even own a passport, as compared to 2/3 of Canadians and 3/4 of Brits. And if we allow that only 42% of all Americans own passports, we have to consider that the number of Americans who are people of colour is going to be significantly lower. Do we have a problem in America and maybe in other countries where we just say to certain people the world is sort of not for you. Do you think I mean, are you kind of expressing that you were raised with this idea that that outside world is not going to be for you because of the situation you're born in, the color of your skin, or some other kind of you know constraint?
Subconsciously, I think, yeah, I think we are told the world is not for us. My mom never traveled. My dad never traveled when they were together, and when they weren't together, he didn't travel. My mom's siblings, they didn't travel. They stayed. They were born in the town that I was born in. They were raised there. They stayed there. My idea of traveling when I was growing up was um, a white woman and a white man backpacking through Europe. That was the idea that I had about traveling, about studying abroad. Um, and I could not. I knew I would never be able to do that. There was no way I knew that I was going to be able to not work for an extensive period of time in order to travel the world and backpack and have that luxury. I knew that, from the rip. I knew that, and so there was no question within me that this wouldn't happen for me. That I wouldn't travel 40 countries. I knew I wouldn't travel 40 countries because I knew I didn't have the means to travel 40 countries. Um, but I also think that, you can't be what you can't see as well, right? So without an idea of the many different, and you have this podcast, so you've talked to many different people. People travel and have the ability to have many different abilities to travel this world. There are people who travel as their job, people who travel as part of their job. You have people who spend their credit card points to travel. And so there are so many different ways that people can travel the world that I was never privy to. And I don't think many of our Black and brown students even know those things. And so that's why Abiri is here.
What was the leap that you had to make then to get out of this situation, the scenario where you're raised to believe this is not for you, and then you made it for you?
I didn't make it. I didn't consciously make it for me. I think, it was a special, beautiful, amazing 10-year-old student who made it for me. She came to me one day and said I wanted to go. She wanted to go on a field trip, and I said, "Sure, I'm going to take you on a field trip." This is my first year teaching, but I didn't know anything about field trips, so I was going to plan a field trip to the zoo. But before I could say, okay, we're going to go to the zoo, she said, nope, I don't want to go to the zoo. I was like, oh, okay. No, I don't want to go to the aquarium. The Atlanta aquarium, the Georgia aquarium was just being built. So it was like, the biggest aquarium in the world at that time. When she said that, I was like, okay, well, where do you want to go? I want to go out of the country. And so being my first year and feeling like I had the responsibility and the weight on my shoulders to make sure that I provided this young girl everything that she thought she needed to be successful, I took on that challenge. So it wasn't necessarily something that I saw myself breaking out of. I needed to break her out of it. And so I researched for educational tours for students, and I found one, and that's how I started traveling with students.
So where did you take her and presumably some others? And how
Yeah,
and your school went along with it, I take it.
yeah, yeah. So it's funny. No, they didn't. They said I couldn't go. So ironically, I never took her anywhere. I proposed the trip and they said no, and I was upset about it. And I left that school and went to another school, and they said yes. And the first trip that I took students to was to Costa Rica.
So you actually went and found a school, or you were lucky in your next job and they were up for it.
Yeah, I found a school and told them what I wanted, and told them this was part of what I wanted to do. I had researched it at the other school, and they said no, and I needed to do this, and they agreed.
Great. I'm really glad. It's that I'm just curious, is that a public school or was it a private school that was able to do that?
They were both two private. I'm sorry, they were both two charter schools, and so they were able to do things different than public schools were. And so the second school, went on the limb and said, "Okay, we can do it."
Great. Now, but that wasn't your first time out of the country, was it? Or was it?
It
Costa
was.
Rica, it was. So you were
It
like
was.
having
It
as much
was.
fun, as much of a learning experience as the kids you took.
I had my camera like they did. I was listening to the tour guide like as much as they were. I was starstruck, and my head was on a swivel, and I was soaking it all in and basking in it. There's a picture of me on that first trip. I was on we stayed in little cabins, and I was on the porch of the cabin in a hammock eating pineapples. And at that point, I was like living the life.
You mentioned, God, there's so much to cover here, but you mentioned 40 countries. I'm going to ask you just to focus on a few that you think are your favorites to take your students. And again, your students are students of color.
I'll just name a couple. So Panama, Guatemala, two Central American countries. Let's see, Ghana, and Cuba. And I tell you why. All of those countries have a huge people of color population, and they all have a tie to the African diaspora. So it's we have the ability to be able to connect cultures. Guatemala is probably my favorite place that I like to travel, which in turns makes it my favorite place to take students because we end up living with families. And again, it's like you said before, Tony, like getting people out of their little bubble and experiencing another culture so that they're no longer myopic about, having, myopia about the world views. And so when we live with families in Guatemala, they wake up daily with these people. They go to sleep with these people. They eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They take Spanish lessons while they're there. We volunteer. We work at a local nonprofit with kids. We go visit schools. But more importantly, they really have an understanding of how people grow up. We also have intercultural conversations where we take, students from Guatemala and our students, and we sit them in a circle, and then we allow them to ask each other questions. What do you want to ask? Like, what do you want to know about what life is like about living here, and vice versa. And those questions and those answers are sometimes those times are sometimes the best times on the trips.
Was the third country you mentioned, did you say Ghana?
Ghana was the third country. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ghana, I've seen about it, read about it. I do know Black people who have said it's just, the place these days. When were you last in Ghana?
I was last in Ghana in 2018. That was kind of the year of the return, I believe, was 2018. Yeah. And that was it's stereotypical to say it was a spiritual trip. But it really felt like home. Yeah. And everybody that we were with had that same feeling. Many times, Tony, Black people want to go back to Africa, and they're seeking to go back because they're trying to find that connection. They're trying to get that connection that was lost through the transatlantic slave route, through slavery. They're trying to reconnect and trying to find some semblance of home. And in Ghana, we found that in the villages we were in. We also visited a school there. Every place I go, Tony, I go to a school. Every single country I go to, whether I travel with my school or with my own personal, we visit schools. But whether we found out when we went to school, we went to a small village. We had a naming ceremony. We went to the slave castles. There was not one part of that trip that people didn't feel like they were at home and part of the environment, part of the community.
Yeah, I watched a video really recently. I'm trying to think if it was British or American about Black people moving to Accra, to Ghana. It just looked so incredibly vibrant there in Accra, and it's something I'm aware of. What are the age of the kids you take? Does it vary?
At my school, I take students from anywhere with fifth grade to high school, and in my personal trips, I want the students to be at least sixth or seventh grade because of the kind of trips that we do. The trips that I do with school are more organized. They're not as rustic, if I can use the word. So I want kids to be at least sixth grade because I want them to be able to reflect and understand what they're experiencing and be able to bring that back home.
How do you get into Cuba? Isn't there still some kind of travel embargo?
So you have 11 travel visas that you can apply for. One of those is support for Cuban people, and we use that visa. And that your itinerary has to be strictly adhered to. You have to be able to account for all your hours and times there, and show that what you're doing there directly affects and supports the Cuban person. Um, so we do that. I have a couple of friends there. We use them as our personal guide, our personal drivers as well. We use private restaurants. We don't go to state sponsored restaurants. We don't use any hotels. We use Airbnbs that directly puts money into the pocket of individuals as well. Um, we all of my travelers bring things to donate and to help and support the Cuban people. So everybody's bringing at least one extra piece of luggage, that's filled to the brim with anything you can imagine, anything that's broken, that's electronic, because Cubans are very ingenious and they can fix anything, to underwear and t-shirts and other clothing and flip-flops and shoes and toiletries and you name it, we bring it. So that's how we're able to, get in and out of Cuba.
Are there any places that have been particularly negative experiences? And I guess I'm asking whether that's down to racism, down to just not feeling welcome, or that there's some institutional problems that you don't want to go back to, particularly with students.
Um, I wouldn't say at this point I wouldn't go back to them. You know, China is something else, because of the isolation of China, because of the language barrier, because it's homogeneous. You have a lot of different variables to deal with when being in China, particularly when the only black people they see are on TV and are superstars. And so I don't say I wouldn't go back, but it's definitely not going to be on the top of my list to go back to China. We had students who just didn't feel comfortable. They were, being, had their picture taken without them knowing, and then, you're walking and people were grabbing their hair, and it made them feel really uncomfortable. So a lot of that is due to the novelty of Black people in China, and curiosity, I know. And I want to say maybe there's a bit of it that's a little bit of racism, where you're kind of like you're feeling like you are in a zoo. I don't know what percentage that is, but taking the kids, it doesn't feel good when they don't feel good.
We live in a racist world. It's pretty evident about that. You and me speaking in America in the second week of January. I mean, let's not beat about the bush about this country that we live in, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And so yeah, so taking a deep sigh, because just where we are right now. How, in general, how do you see the rest of the world? I mean, do you feel pretty much welcome where you go?
I do feel pretty much welcome. I remember in South Africa, we had this guide at one point who he was Afrikaans, and he made this joke about winning Mandela, and he was a white Afrikaans. I'm like, it with a group of black people, like, don't you know your audience? Like, what are you doing? He made this awful joke. And this is right after, I think right after Nelson Mandela had passed away, I believe. Um, so yeah, so in South Africa, we had a couple of incidences, but they have a long history of racism and all of that. So, that is what it is. And most oftentimes it happens for me in the airports or on the planes, is where, I end up trying to hold my tongue because I have kids with me, or hold my attitude, right? Make sure I stay calm. But for the most part, I feel pretty welcome in the countries that I visit.
At this point, three of Ashley's former or ongoing travel students dialed in to join us. I started off by asking them which countries they'd been to. Nia went first.
So I'm 24, and the countries I've been to include Senegal, Italy, China, Cuba, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Morocco.
Next up, Deja.
I am 23 years old, and I have been to the Dominican Republic, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, and Guatemala.
And now, Joy.
I'm 15. I've been to Jamaica, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, the Virgin Islands.
All three are way more travelled than I was at their age, especially in Nia's case, though much of her travel was on study abroad programs. The one place all three young women have been with Mr. Scott, as they call Ashley, is Guatemala. So I asked them to talk more about that experience. Again, Nia went first.
So that ended up being my favorite trip of all the trips that I've taken so far in my life. And the reason why is because of the at-home feel that I had when I was there. We were in a very rural place. I actually forget the name. Mr. Scott, can you remind me?
San Pedro.
Oh, San Pedro. Yes, San Pedro. And what I really loved about it, and I was telling Mr. Scott this a few days ago, that even though their community is like so well defined, it's amazing how welcoming they are. I've been to more like westernized places like Italy or in China, and even though things were more familiar, it was still more divided in a way. And so it wasn't like that in Guatemala. And I also found something similar with Senegal too. To me, it just seems like groups of people who are more like well-defined and like who are very true to their culture. It seems like they don't really have any issues with accepting other people in their cultures, because it's almost like they had nothing to fight for. I think maybe that's where it stems from.
Thanks. Is there anything either of the others, Deja or Joy, could offer on that?
I actually really agree with that. When we went to Guatemala, that was one of my favorite trips outside of going to the DR. But I do agree that it was very like family oriented. That was, I think, the best part about it. And I think that was also just by what we were staying in a house with the family. So they were there with us, which I think actually helped. Any other trip that I've been on, it's always been where it's like a cruise ship or we're in a resort somewhere. So it's just like a bunch of tourists and everybody's just kind of enjoying, their time and, whatever, everything's catered to you. But we're at a home where we went and I'm washing dishes like I'm at home, I'm cleaning up like I'm at home. So it felt really nice to just really be able to interact with the family and just the whole entire environment down there. It's like they were all looking out for each other. And it's like the city that we were in, it felt so small. Everything was in walking distance and everybody like felt like they knew each other. So it was like, you're walking down the street and they're talking about, their little family get together or, some of the paintings and, how they all connect. And it was really interesting to see that because you don't really see that in other countries. Like when I've been to Jamaica and when I was in Japan, it was very like, yes, it was like what you were saying, it was more modernized. So it was a lot of stuff that I was familiar with, but it was like, everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. So it's not really like it doesn't feel as welcoming and as friendly like Guatemala did.
Yeah, I think just as a learning experience, I'm if you can't tell from the accent, I grew up in Britain, and we just had exchange trips with France, which is really not far away at all. I mean, we were probably traveling all of about 200 miles as the crow would fly, but it did involve crossing a channel and all of that, and just to be in another family's home. I did it when I was 12, just 13 and just 15, and 2 weeks in another family's home, especially if the parents didn't speak English. I mean, it was a really instructive. You just learned so much culturally. It does strike me as such an amazing thing to be able to do. Where does the social justice aspect of it come into play? Joy, were you maybe the most recent student to go there, just being the youngest? I don't know.
Joy's mom is the director of the nonprofit Social Justice Cafe for Girls. So so she should be able to answer this question very well.
So basically with the Social Justice Cafe for Girls, it's sort of an opportunity to get young girls like myself or girls in the community who haven't been able to travel as much or learn more about social justice and like their regular schools, or they would come to our group and my mom will take them out on traveling. She set up certain pop-up shops, tell them how to be themselves, how to deal with their hair. Basically just basic things that, well, not basic, but things that can help them expand themselves and the community.
So the idea of the Social Justice Cafe for Girls, Joy hit it on the head. One of the things that her mom wants to do is provide an opportunity for Black girls to be able to be in a safe space and grow up and be their full selves without the worry of the external pressures that we have here in the U.S. Additionally, she wants to address some of the common issues and some of the common things that kind of are obstacles or pitfalls that many of our Black girls have to go through sexual violence and gender violence and sexism and all that. So they talk about all those things. Nia and Deja, they're both over 20 years old, so they came with us as peer mentors. So having already gone through the 15, 16, 17-year-old stage, they were able to provide a little guidance, some stability, some big sistership to some of the young girls who were there. So that was their role there.
How much do the local people there know about the United States? Like beyond, I mean, what do they know about about politics in America, about race?
They don't
in
know
America?
much about politics in America, only what they see in news. And I think I'm going to answer that question and then make another point. Oftentimes when I go there, they're asking me, especially this past, not this recent election, but the election before that, how could this election happen and what does that mean for them? Because many of them are trying to find better places for themselves. One of the things that our girls do while they're there or what they experience, and Nia and Deja, you guys can jump in and speak for yourselves. But I think what Guatemala does for them and why I like Guatemala, it allows them to just be a Black girl without the pressures and the exterior forces that sometimes can beat our girls down, right? That can sometimes cause us to question ourselves, question their beauty, question their worth, question, everything about them. They can literally just be down there, and Deja can just be Deja, and she can be, a city girl and rock out, and Nia can be Nia, and she can be introverted and, just do her thing, and Joy can be in between and, have the luxury of both worlds, and no one questions their femininity, no one questions who they are, no one questions anything about them, and they have the luxury of what we really want them to have while they're here. But you guys can speak to that more if you want to. But that's the beauty of Guatemala, why we go there every year.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Guatemala was definitely fun. And just being able to just be out and having fun it's crazy I'm going to say in the city, but being on my city girl activity and just having fun down there and actually just feeling safe. I think that was definitely something new for me, being able to just go out and just hang out with the local people and not feel like something is going to happen. Like we had gone, like our first night there, we were out till like 2-3 o'clock in the morning with people we had just met, and we were just having so much fun. And not having like those pressures and those worries of like looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. And like, it was like, everybody was just looking out for each other. And there was a lady, who lives next to the person that we were staying with. She had a dance class upstairs, and she had saw us. It was me and a group of the girls. We were out, and she had saw us, and she was like, "Now you girls get home safe." Like, she was with us, and then she left early, and she was, making sure that we were okay. So it's like, that's cool, like to, have just met her and to still kind of have that, that like motherly, I'm watching out for you, even though I really don't know you. So that was definitely fun for sure.
Are you able to keep friendships going when you come back? I mean, in the old days, it would be pen pals, but I don't think anybody's particularly. Well, are you? Do you write letters to them, but do you stay in touch with them? Have you actually kind of like developed friendships with the girls down there?
Joy?
Yeah, so it's so funny because I think the day before yesterday, we were on the phone with Mario. He's a guy in Guatemala, and he sells backpacks and like bracelets and stuff. And we kind of like acquainted like a friendship with him. So every now and then he'll call and we'll answer and be like, "Hey, Mario," and like even with the families, we still keep in contact with the families as well. It's kind of like it's like a family relationship. Like you're calling your aunt or your cousins and you're like wishing them happy birthday and like, how are you? And stuff like that.
And Tony, that's the beauty of Abiri Tours and the Social Justice Cafe for Girls, right? It's not just enough to get, Black and brown kids out of the United States into another country, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to get them out, to get them to build relationships so that they understand that, that they are part of something larger.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, to me, what I really love about Abiri Tours and the partnership with the cafe is that the trip is organized in a way where we're going to build relationships with the locals. And so on my regular study abroad trips, sometimes I didn't have that. And so sometimes things will pop up for my classmates, issues on like, well, is this cultural appropriation? Can we partake? But when I'm with the Abiri Tours, the way things are organized, we're getting to meet the locals, and they're oftentimes inviting us to partake. And so it's just different when you're invited to say, hey, here's the local dress, or here's how you make this meal. Like it's sharing. And to me, that's what makes it a whole lot special, a whole lot more special than my study abroad trip.
Another place all four have been to, and it's another place I have not been to, is the Dominican Republic, or DR for short. For Deja, that's all about family, but for Ashley and Joy, they went on a volunteer trip with a mission.
And we went there and lived in a village with no Wi-Fi. She didn't like that too much. In the mountains, and we stayed there for about a week and a half. Building birdhouses for the golden sparrow, because they're endemic to Dominican Republic, and they're endangered. And these golden sparrows help the local farmers to keep away the bugs, the insect. And so we were building those birdhouses in order to try to bring them back.
That sounds pretty amazing. And how were you without the Wi-Fi, Joy?
Oh, without the Wi-Fi, I mean, it gave me a sense to connect with the people around me and like the nature, instead of just sitting on my phone taking pictures. It was able for you to make the memories, to relive through them instead of
Joy. That's the politically correct answer. Like, did you like not being without the Wi-Fi, Joy? Come on.
Yes, I did. Honestly, I did, because during that trip, like, we went with like a group of people, and most of them I didn't really know that well. But after we left the trip, we all became friends. So it was.
That is true.
Yeah.
The Dominican Republic had a profound influence on Nia as well.
I went with my parents. We went for Thanksgiving, and we stayed on the resort, but my parents really wanted me to get out and understand local living. I forget what part we were in, but what I do remember was that it was very rural, and our tour guide was a local who had all these connections with all the other locals. All of them were like small businesses. And so just like the way that was run, to where it wasn't like how like cruise ships, or like how resort companies have these very packaged tours for tourists. It was very much like, you're gonna get the real deal. And so that, to me, just like that just took off. That's the whole reason why I travel today. So.
Well, that was a perfect segue, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask next. Was literally that. What is it about travel that makes somebody, more whole? Why is it so important for young people to travel?
I think it's important to travel because you get to experience other cultures. I feel like in the U.S., we are so fortunate to have a lot of different like luxuries that other countries don't have, and you don't realize how blessed you are until sometimes you're in another area. And it doesn't always mean that you go to a country, a third world country, or however you want to call it, but just even in countries that are more well developed, there are certain things that you just appreciate more. Like you have more, like in Guatemala, for example, we had fresh food every single day. We went to the market and saw them, shopping for food and getting chickens like that. And that was a different experience than what we're used to. So that was definitely really nice. And you just get to get an experience of other cultures and how they live, how they interact, how they work. And I think it brings more of an understanding, more understanding of people in general when you're able to see different cultures like that and not just kind of stay stuck at home.
Anybody else like to offer? That was a pretty complete answer. But Joy? Like, how much more travel do you have ahead of you?
I have a lot of more traveling ahead of me. Basically, Deja, she hit it very well. That was kind of like the reason why I still travel now, because sometimes I do have the option if I want to travel or not, and I always choose to, because learning about different cultures is just one thing that I love to do, and I don't like to sit still. So.
It's interesting, Tony, because we as we plan for the Social Justice Cafe, like we plan what countries we want to go to, and we this second year we were thinking about going to another country, but we had several of the girls who were repeat travelers, and Joy was one of them. And I initially we were gonna go somewhere else, and I was outnumbered and outvoted because they had so much fun in Guatemala. And I think they have fun because they're with kids and they're running around, and they're carefree or whatever. And they may know this. Joy may know this. Deja and Nia, particularly may know this. But as an older adult, I see the joy that it brings to other people when they interact with my students. I see when my students are listening to them and trying to understand the language and trying to understand the culture and asking them questions about their lives and their families and their culture, and how do you do this and why do you do this, and not in a way of being rude, but in a way of being inquisitive and wanting to know and wanting to learn and wanting to be a part of that particular culture, as much as we can while we're there. I see the smile and the light that it brings to the people in the countries that we travel when my students go. And then, conversely, I see the light it brings in our students as well. They get excited when we start talking about, certain things like, watch, you want to see them smile? Let's talk about that mountain. Everybody remember the mountain? You see?
They're all smiling.
I know what impacts them. I know, what I see when changes happen within their lives. I can see. And just a small anecdote, we're going to use Deja as an example. We climbed this mountain that's called Indian Nose, and we do this sunrise hike. And they all knew that it was going to be a sunrise hike. They all knew it was going to be a mountain. They knew what we were getting into. But probably halfway through the mountain, I'd say 4 or 5 of the girls wanted to give up. And 3 or 4 of the adults that came with us wanted to give up as well. But they all pushed through. And if you could have seen the breakthrough in all of their eyes when it got to the mountain, it was definitely metaphorical, but it was a representation of life, what they had gone through in other parts of their lives, and then the ability to feel like they can do and conquer anything.
So for the 3 of you girls, is there a place that's top of your list to visit next? And if there is, why? What is it and why?
I'll go with Costa Rica. That's been on my list for a while because of their happiness score, and they seem to be making a lot of progress with their sustainability efforts. Plus, it's one of the most beautiful countries.
One of the places that I've been wanting to go to for a long time is actually Tulum, Mexico. I've been to Cozumel before, but I really would like to go to Tulum and go see the I forgot what they're called. They're like these underwater caves that I really, really want to go see. I just can't remember what the name of them are.
I think one place that I want to go to Switzerland. I've never been to anywhere in Europe. So for me, Switzerland is nice. And I always go somewhere hot. So going somewhere cold for a chance would be nice as well. And I really like their scenery that they have, like the mountains and the calls that they do.
I actually have one more thing to add.
Go ahead.
About one of your earlier questions, why is it useful or important for young people to travel? And I had to marinate on that for a bit. And I came away with like a few major points. And so it also made me think about like what's going on in the world as far as like the recent political events. And I had a teacher from elementary school, and actually this teacher taught both me and Deja. And so we were talking about some of the things that was going on, and she was saying how important it is to be able to hold multiple truths. And I feel like that's what traveling has done for me, especially in terms of like how to find middle ground with people, and then how useful that's been for me in my academic life and like on the job, just being able to find middle ground with people and not hold on so hard and like so strong to like what I think is right. And so I feel like traveling has really cut my teeth for that skill. So
thank you. That's great. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you guys. Thanks again, and all the best for 2021. And here's hoping we can all get to some other destinations sometime this year.
Yeah.
All
my
right.
pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Ashley and I stayed on the call to follow up on a couple of aspects. We talked about the fact that all his educational travel was cancelled for 2020 once the pandemic started, and he doesn't feel comfortable organising trips yet for either his school students or his tour company. But that will change. And so, specifically, being intrigued by his own love of the place, I wanted to ask more about Guatemala and the people there. Now, you touched on this a little bit, I think, when we were talking with the girls, that they don't know too much details about the USA, but some of them might think that they would have a better life here. So conversely, and this is a constant talking point of mine. Conversely, we are raised and sort of taught through a lot of media here in the States that other countries, where people are trying to come here, must therefore be just complete disasters. So I've traveled enough to know that that's it's not as black and white as that, if you'll excuse the metaphor. What can you say about that kind of built-in attitude that we tend to have about those Central American
agree.
countries?
I agree. I think in the United States that there's this idea that the United States is the center of the universe, right? Like everything, comes from and everything tries to get back to the United States for whatever reason, right? We have the best of everything is the idea. What I've learned when traveling is that there's not one comfort that I can't find any other place that I travel to. I don't miss United States because of X or Y or whatever or Z. One of the things about Guatemala is that it's such a peaceful place to be. Like you haven't gone, Tony, but I promise you, it's a time suck. Like you go there and you say, I'm going to go be here 2 weeks, and then 2.5 weeks goes by, and you're like, oh, maybe I can stay another week, and you just get sucked in. It's the most peaceful place I've ever been in my life. It's on this lake. Well, San Pedro is where I go, and San Pedro is on this Lake Atitlan, which is the most beautiful lake I've ever seen. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Joy he described it being in the valley. It's a place that is extremely magical because of the history of the Mayans that is there. But I think when I go there, going back to your question, is that I'm trying to find comfort, and when I get there, I find that in Guatemala, and I find that with people and around people, and so I don't really look for anything else. Now, again, I'm privileged and have the ability to be able to support myself for the time that I'm there and live at a means that make me comfortable, of course, which most people don't have that ability. People who live there don't. But there's people who live there who are from the States and from Australia and from the UK who have retired there and who've made a living there. And I think it's a testament to their ability to kind of, excuse my French, but just, disrobe and leave the bullshit away, and just actually live. And that's what happens when you get there.
Of the 40 countries that you've been to, which is the most fascinating?
Japan is that for me. It's because of, and I've taken students there, and in their classes they looked at the rise of Japan from World War II to the 21st century and how they were able to rebuild and what they were able to do in order to, and then to be on top of the technology world and be cutting edge. And that place to me is fascinating to see the dichotomy between old Japan and feudalism and then new Japan and the robots and Toyota and all of that comes in, and the all the automated stuff they have there, the deep culture. It's super expensive, but it definitely is fascinating. I love Japan.
Japan is actually really, really high on my list for some of the reasons that you mentioned. I'm fascinated by the prospect of being fascinated, but I'm also pretty well sold on Guatemala at this point. So we may have to be back in touch at some point when we feel we can do this again. So,
Tony, that was my goal at one point, to let everybody know of the secret of which Guatemala is, and let them know, because here's the thing. I literally have family there now. Like the family I stay with, I stayed there my first year there. I was there, like I said, 5 or 6 weeks, and each year after that, so it's been like 5 years now, except for last year, I've stayed with that same family. The daughter of the mom I stay with just had a baby, and she named her baby after my girlfriend because of our efforts in helping them and reaching out to them and being a part of their lives. And so it was my mission to let everybody know of the secret of Guatemala. Now I think I got to pull back because it's been trending on Discovery Channel and all kind of blogs, and I think everybody's figuring out San Pedro at this point. And I want to keep my little secret, untouched and pristine as it was when I first went there. But you got to go, though. You got to go.
And I will. You can find out more about Abiri Tours by visiting abiritours.com. That's ABIRITOURS.com. You can also find Traveling Incognito on many, but not all, of the podcast platforms. Just a reminder, Ashley hasn't updated it since he went back to school in the fall. And you can also find Abiri Tours on a lot of social media. And I'm going to put a lot of different things in the show notes, and on our own social media, I'm going to post some pictures that Ashley's going to send me as well. My deepest gratitude to Ashley for being such a great guest and for lining up the 3 students as well. And I want to wish him all the best of luck. And who knows, maybe I'll try and find a way to sign on for his travel at some point, or just show up in San Pedro, Guatemala when he's down there. Once we're all back out and about, that is. This is the point in the show where I usually just give a little bit of a diary entry on what I've been doing in terms of things that relate to the format of One Step Beyond. And the thing I really want to talk about today is that the day before I edited this show, the day before the inauguration, I got out skiing for the first time this season. Now, I kind of was really thinking about doing a show on skiing, especially in the pandemic. But, it's really hard work holding that Zoom recorder, and it's especially going to be hard work holding it while skiing. And I think I've got a weird bit of carpal tunnel syndrome from the day that I went up Rusk Mountain months back now with Ken Posner holding a recorder at a certain angle for about 3 or 4 hours while we were on a hike. So I didn't do it. What I did do is I got to go with my oldest son, Campbell. Now, from the age of about 7 to all the way to him going to college, he and I would spend our winters on the mountains, particularly on Hunter Mountain. We lived nearby, and it was relatively inexpensive to get season tickets, and especially if you decide that you're not going to do a ski trip further afield. Campbell snowboards, by the way, and he got really good at it. He's pretty lightweight, but you know what? That just seems to mean he flies even faster down the hill. It's been that father-son bonding thing for me. And ever since he went off to college, I kind of found that I really, really missed doing it with him. I would still go with friends and go on my own during the week, but it's not the same as like running is for me. It's something that I associate with having someone close to me to chat with on the chairlift. Campbell and I have sorted out most of life's problems on the ski slopes. Now, this may or may not be the place for me to say that he's had a lot of problems with asthma this last year. He got ill just before the pandemic, and he's been living with mom and effectively been isolating for much of the last year. It's not the way a 25-year-old should be living. So I was so excited that we took a 2.5-hour drive up to Gore Mountain. The weather was perfect, meaning cold, but not too cold, with a few snow flurries. There was enough snow on the ground for us to ride and ski fast, but not so much that it bunched up into moguls, and I've learned the hard way that Gore is capable of that, and that it can throw you for a wobbly. I was kind of worried that my kid might not have the strength needed to get out there for a day, but we got a solid 4 hours in and pretty much took it till last run. And in case you're wondering, and many of you may be, here in New York State at least, there are some very firm conditions laid down for the ski mountains. You travel on the chairlift and in the gondola, which Gore Mountain has, in your own bubble, meaning, in our case, just the 2 of us. If you're single, you can also ask to have that gondola all for yourself, or the chairlift all for yourself, or go with one other person at most. Gore Mountain had put up a pop-up boot tent outside, which I used. It was heated as well, which was really nice, and it was also ventilated at the same time. And the end result was that the 2 of us didn't need to go into the lodge whatsoever. And I've talked about this in recent episodes, from running that marathon in Albany, that these are not even particularly group activities. You're out there on a mountain pretty much on your own, skiing, riding at your own pace. You're not around other people. You're not breathing on other people. Compared to taking a trip to the supermarket, this is like, the kind of the safest thing you can be doing. And just to add, there's a requirement to have a face covering on at all times when you're not actively going down the mountain or eating. And given that most skiers and snowboarders are wearing face masks half the time anyway, that's not too much of a discomfort. Skiing isn't a cheap sport, unfortunately, especially when you're treating your son, but there is no such thing as a bad day on the mountain. One Step Beyond is written, produced and narrated by Tony Fletcher. Incidental music is by Noel Fletcher, unless otherwise stated. The theme song is by Madness, used with permission, and the logo is by Mark Lerner. Special thanks to Radio Kingston for airing these episodes and for supplying studio space when not under lockdown. If you like what you hear, please consider throwing us a tip via the Support This Show button on your phone or by visiting supporter.acast.com/onestepbeyond lowercase. You can also hit the subscribe button and or leave a positive rating and or review. It all helps. One Step Beyond is on social media, mainly on Instagram. Just search One Step Beyond with Tony Fletcher there or on Facebook and Twitter and we should come up straight away. To subscribe to a newsletter, to reach out via email, and especially if you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, the address is onestepbeyond@ijamming.net. One Step Beyond is available on just about every podcast platform known to man, and most likely a few that have yet to be discovered.